So you're introing.
I'm introing?
Oh, I'll intro. Okay. Okay. Hello and welcome to Things I've Learned. I have my co-host here, Rolando. I'm Alessandra, and we have Dali from Dali Talks. And welcome. We're excited to have you here. So first, tell us a little bit about you, Dali. Tell us your ethnic background, where you're from, and what you do.
Thank you, Alessandra and Rolando, for having me here. I'm super excited, especially because I'm a fan of your show that I just discovered not long ago. But yeah, just a little bit about me. I currently live in Maryland. I was raised in California, but I was born in Nicaragua. I came to the US at the age of 7, and I was in California until I graduated high school. And then I was whisked away by the government because I joined the military. I joined the army. So I have a traditional job. I'm what's called a caption editor. I'm pretty much an archivist. I archive a lot of historical footage for the government and pictures, which is pretty cool because I get to learn a lot of things that I will probably never use in my lifetime. But it's very useful because I can kind of strike up a conversation about almost anything with anyone, because I know a little bit of a lot of things. But aside from that, I have a business. I own Dali Talks LLC, which is a company. I created the Diversity Anti-Bullying Academy under that company. And I did that due to some personal reasons, some experiences with bullying, and also because of the need that I see of children needing to be educated about bullying and as well as diversity, because my children and myself and my husband, we've all experienced some type of discrimination or prejudice due to the lack of knowledge by a lot of people. So that's what I do. But I educate mainly the parents so that the parents can have those conversations with their kids in their own way. Because, everybody has a different style, and every kid is different with their maturity level.
That's awesome. I think that's like very needed. So thank you for bringing that to the world because that's again like super needed. As far as like that kind of training, do you go into schools? Do you do like private training? Like how does that work?
Yeah, so I do everything pretty much. I love working at the schools because the schools already have the public there. They have the parents. So if there's a school that has a resource center, then I'll reach out to them and ask them if they want me to bring in the workshops. Because we're in this pandemic, I offer everything online virtually. But as soon as it's over, I'm going back out there because I love connecting directly, person to person. So yeah, I've worked with universities. I've done ASU has this program called PBS Arizona, where it's conferences for teachers. So I do that one every year. I've gone to libraries and they've hired me, nonprofit organizations, independent business owners, and I've done one-on-one coaching with parents as well. So yeah, I dabble into all these spaces and it's really fun. I love it. I know it's challenging sometimes because some people kind of feel resistant to opening up to new ways of thinking about certain things. But I love seeing the progress and that aha moment when they're like, oh, yeah, that's why we should do this. Or I didn't think of it that way. So that's really rewarding. I love that part of my job.
What made you get into anti-bullying, and as well, what kind of training did you have to take, or did you kind of like learn from experience of your own children?
So I have personal experience being bullied. So when I moved from Nicaragua to California, I was that weird kid that didn't fit in anywhere because the Nicaraguan dialect is so different. And being in California, most Latinx people were Mexican or Mexican descent. So the dialects are totally different. And I remember distinctly like the kids would just mock me or tease me. And then eventually it was just bullying straight up all the time. It was about not speaking correct Spanish, or Black kids would tease me for being like wetback Mexican, calling me names, derogatory things, or white kids also same thing. So I felt like I never belonged anywhere. And it got very physical later. Like I got beat up for unknown reasons. To this day, there's like a few of the altercations that I still don't know why and who and what the heck I did. So then I became a parent. And my baby, when she was 5, she started school. She gets on the bus and everything's okay. And then the next day, this little boy asks her to be his girlfriend. And he too was 5. So she was like, nope, I'm 5, I've got goals. Boyfriend's not one of them. So we thought everything was cool. And then we started noticing, my husband and I, we'd walk her to the bus stop. And we started noticing that the little boy had 2 older brothers who were about 7 and 9. And the 2 boys were teaching him to be a bully by bullying him. They were telling him, like, you gotta show him who's boss. You gotta man up. You gotta be tough. You gotta do this and that. It was like all this like hard talk. And one of them would grab him they would grab his arms and hold him while the other one would punch him. And as they would punch him, they would say, yeah, you gotta be tough. You gotta man up. You're the man. And I was like, oh my gosh, what is going on here?
My
This poor
goodness.
beautiful little 5-year-old. He like, don't do that to him, and so my husband and I, we would stop and but they would continue every day. And then we noticed they were doing that every time my daughter would get closer to the bus stop. So it was like them trying to show or force their little brother, the 5-year-old, to show her what I guess she had missed out on or something.
Like he was a tough guy or something.
Yeah, it was crazy. So at the time, I think I was graduating from college with my master's in women and gender studies. And in that field of study, we study all types of like gender identities and certain terms like femininity, feminism, toxic masculinity, all of that. So my first thought was like, oh shoot, that is straight up toxic masculinity. It was just shocking. And one of those times when this was happening to this little boy, it's like my eyes locked with his eyes. Because I was kind of angry at him because he had tried kicking my daughter and doing all these things. But it's like I looked at the little boy and it was like time stopped and I could just see his little eyes and they were full of tears. He was holding it back and he kept saying like, stop it, but trying not to sound too weak while he was saying it to his brothers. And you could tell that he was angry and sad and humiliated. And it just broke my heart. And I realized, oh man, I need to do something because this little boy needs help too. Although he just tried to kick my daughter and all these other kids, he needs help too. So when I went to the bus driver and said, hey, this is going on, she pretty much said, we can't do anything unless somebody says that they saw it. And all of the kids were intimidated. So nobody would say anything for a long time. So I went to the principal and I told her what happened. And she said, I'm sorry, but we can't do anything because it didn't happen on school grounds. And I was like, what the F? Like, what? Are you kidding me? You are the principal. You're supposed to take care of my baby and you hired that bus company. So in my eyes, you're responsible just as much as the bus driver is. But those were the type of things that as a new parent, because she was 5 years old, but I'm still a new parent to a 5-year-old starting school, So I didn't know that this was a thing. And that catapulted me into doing research about bullying and school policies. And since my master's, my concentration was in social policy and leadership, I had that training, that, mentality, okay, look up policies, see how they work for or against you. Let me see how I can help either make a change or at least create awareness. So that's what I did. And I started sharing it with PTA or PTO, the Parent Teacher Association, or the Parent Teacher Organizations. I shared it with friends and family. And somehow they were like, oh, can you do a presentation? So a presentation here and there. And I started accumulating all this information over the years. And in 2017, when I was laid off from work, I couldn't find a job. So I was like, let me do this. Let me do this as a business. Actually, my husband pushed I came home one night and from before I got laid off, and he was like, hey, I set you up an appointment with one of the school principals. You're gonna go pitch this idea of this workshop to him tomorrow at 9 a.m. So I was like, crap, I got to put something together. And that's really how Dali Talks and the Diversity and Anti-Bullying Academy was born. Just, I got kicked into it.
There's so many things I want to talk about. Whatever happened to the little boy?
I don't know. I know that it took over a year to get some help for him. And I kept going back because he didn't stop. It would like fluctuate, like maybe a week or two would go by and nothing would happen. But I know that the parents were talked to a lot. I know that both parents were military. I think that there was something going on with the mom and the dad. I think they were witnessing some kind of altercations at home. But I know that he apologized to my child and other kids, but I never really got to see a real solution. There was something going on at home. And I honestly, to this day, I wish I could find out what happened to him because I felt so bad for him. It wasn't his fault.
That's amazing that you were able to see that you could make a change, not only in your daughter's life, but someone else's life. Like, that's amazing. I want to like rewind a bit and like talk a bit about like how you got to college, how you even got to study in your master's public policy.
Oh, yes.
I'm sure that's like a long-winded story, but
yeah. Yeah, actually, I joined the military because I did not have money for college or confidence in myself to go to college. I grew up in a really rough home. My mom ended up being a single mom of 6, and I'm the oldest of the 6. So she ended up being a single mom by the time I was 14. It was a blessing that my father left, and we're all happy about that because the environment in our lives improved significantly. But by the time that I was 14, I had already been through so much that I kind of had slacked on my work because I was at school more worried about my mom's safety rather than, or like what would happen to me and my mom and my siblings instead of focusing in school. So that kind of, it shot my confidence. Plus I had been bullied too. So I was already feeling all of this stuff. And I decided somehow that I wanted to do something exciting, something against the grain as a woman or as a girl. So I said, why not the military? Because, you'd always see the be all that you can be in the Army and the commercials. So they got me. The commercial worked. And I remember I convinced my mom to let me go into the military because I told her I will go to college if you let me because they have the GI Bill. And it took a little convincing, but that's how I did it. But actually, when I began schooling in the military, it had to be online. And that was in 97 when I enlisted. So by the time I was done with training and everything, it was 99. And online schooling was horrible. So like all these kids right now doing virtual schooling, I feel for them because if I, as a 19, 20-year-old couldn't do it and get good grades, I don't know how. Like my kids, I watch them and I'm like, I don't know how you have good grades. Kudos to you, kid. But I ended up with the idea of wanting to go into business. For some reason, I always wanted to be in business and I didn't know quite why. And the classes sucked. They were awful. They were so boring. I remember taking like business law 101 and 102. And I was like, oh my gosh, shoot me. Just this is horrible. I can't take another one of these. So I kind of just kept taking all these credits. 10 years passed by. I did 10 years in the military. And until I left the military, then I pretty much decided, you know what, I really need a degree. I don't need 100 and some. I had like over 130 some credits and no degree. So I just used my GI Bill afterwards and I went to college full time again with a business degree, como que no había aprendido or something. And then I realized quickly after the first semester, I'm going to switch because I took an English class that spoke about sociology. And I was like, oh my gosh, what is this amazing field? This is my calling. So I take this sociology class. And then in that sociology class, we had this women's words in writing class or something like that. And that led me to women and gender studies. And then that called out to me. So I was like, oh my gosh, wait, I can do both. I can do sociology and women's studies. This is heaven. This is perfect. I ended up having to choose one or the other. And I chose women's and gender studies. But the reason I chose it was because it's like sociology where you learn a lot about different things of the human race. Mm-hmm. And a lot of it spoke to me because I could relate to it. For example, when I was very little, I remember that first feeling of inequity, I guess you can say. I didn't know the words back then, but I remember I was told, well, you can't go outside and play with the boys. And I was like, well, why not? Because you're a girl. And I was like, well, what does that have anything to do with playing outside? So I felt like since I was very little, I think I was like 5 or 6, that first memory. And also like just watching my mom having to be very dependent financially and in every other way of my dad. I always felt like, no, that can't be me. I can't be that person. Like, that's so unfair. Why do women have to, depend on anyone to have their financial freedom or anything? Or
Yeah.
like, yeah, right. Or like, why doesn't the police do anything every time I call them when he's beating the crap out of her? Like, why? This is not fair. They see the bruises, they see the blood, they see everything, but they just don't do anything. He should be in jail. And as a matter of fact, just to point out, we have like over 400,000 people who have died from this pandemic, but we have like millions of people dying from or being abused from domestic abuse yearly, but we're not being as active as we are tackling this virus, right? But anyway, that's a whole nother soapbox that I'll talk about.
I wanted to ask you a bit about the GI Bill. What is that?
Oh yes,
For those who don't know.
Yes, so that is a military benefit that people who serve in the military get, but you have to have served a complete term, or like there are people who get out early because of medical conditions, say like under a year, but if it's not their fault, they're still considered veterans. So what that allows is for you to get 1 degree of any type. So it can be your associates, your bachelor's, or a graduate level degree. There are stipulations, of course. There's like a cap of how much money they put into this. Back in the day, I remember the first year that I was in the military, you had to contribute $100 a month to be able to get about roughly what the state tuition back then was, which was, I think, around $16,000. So that back then was equivalent to getting a bachelor's or so. So I ended up using that. And you have to get out honorably. That means you can't mess up. You can't go AWOL, like absent without leave or anything like that, or have any type of criminal record on your in your history or anything like that. So you can use it while you're in the military, but you can also use it afterwards. So what happens while you're in the military is that you can use like a tuition assistance program, and then you can use your GI Bill when you get out. So that's what it is.
No, that's good to know, because I don't, just in case people don't know. What exactly did you do in the military?
I was a mechanic. I was a mechanic on the tanks, on all those M1s, Bradleys, the AVLVs, which are like the bridge layers for, I think, the Corps of Engineers used, the Humvees or the Hummers, civilian word, the 5-ton trucks, everything like semis. And I got to drive all of them too, which was really fun. But it was hard work. And I didn't know that going in.
I believe that.
Yeah, it was hard because it was so like long hours. Mechanics are so needed in the military because it's not a real desired job. We're always working and you're always oily and dirty and stuff. But I loved it because I got to do something that I can brag about later when I'm really old. If I ever have grandchildren, I can say your grandma was a mechanic on the M1s and, tell these stories. So it was just exhausting because of the long hours. And honestly, I never planned on being a mechanic the whole 10 years. As a matter of fact, when I enlisted, I just wanted to do 3 years and just get out. But my recruiter had mentioned that I could change my job if I wanted to. But what he didn't tell me is that was a lie. It wasn't easy, because by the time, from the moment back then in 97, from the moment that a recruiter would shake your hand to the moment that you would graduate from basic training or boot camp, the military had already invested in you $103,000 per person that they get in. So of course, to train you and then to further invest in you to train you to do your job, then they're not going to.
I was going to say, and then to retrain you.
Right. So what I wanted to do the whole time was, because there were opportunities when some people could reclassify, as they call it, to change jobs, but you had to meet certain criteria if the opportunity would become open. And it was so ironic that Well, I ended up re-enlisting. So that's how I ended up doing 10 years. But on that 10th year, once I had already put in my paperwork that I was getting out, I mean, the plans were there. Then the Department of Defense opened up the opportunity for me to reclassify to what I wanted to be, which was a linguist. And I remember looking at that and I was like, I'll be darned. All these years I've spent trying to reclassify to that particular job. And now it opens up because it's crazy. Like they have these stipulations, like you can't be a certain rank or above, and you have to have so many years in, you have to have a score in your military education of this and that or whatever. And I would always have everything, but they wouldn't have that job open, or they would have that job open, but I didn't meet the rank requirements. So it was crazy, but I never got to change out, and that's okay.
So after the 10-year mark, you just kind of like said, no, you're out, honorably discharged?
Yeah, I took my honorable discharge because by then my husband, who I met in South Korea, who is Guatemalan, I never really met Central American people growing up, but then I go to South Korea and there's this Guatemalan guy working right next to me. So, and I didn't like him one bit. I mean, I could actually say that I almost hated him because I thought he was so arrogant. And here I am. Yeah, 22 years later, 21 years married. Here we are. Yeah, it's just crazy because the military offers so many opportunities for self-discovery and travel and stuff. One thing I want to say though, like if you want to really travel, don't join the army. They don't really travel that much. Navy and Air Force are way better with travel.
That's what I was gonna say, the Air Force.
Yeah.
Well, so it's funny you say that because I actually wanted to join the Air Force, and I actually did the whole recruiter stuff. I went to the actual testing site. We actually take the test, and they classify you a job before you actually sign the contract and get physical. I don't know if they do it like how you did it, but we went to like this certain military base where we get like our physical by the doctors, and that's after the physical. Then we get the class that we were promised after taking that test. I forgot the test called, but and then they'll see if we qualify or not. Like, and then once you sign it, that's it. Like you signed on. Like you can't make any changes. Like there's no anything you say. Like if they tell you something, it doesn't mean squat unless it's written down on paper.
Actually, that's a lie. And I found that out because I believe that too.
Really?
Yeah, that's a lie. You actually have 2 more opportunities to back out. So what happens is once you sign that document is that then you have to wait on your orders, which tell you when to report back to a MEPS center. A MEPS, I can't remember the acronym, what it stands for, but it's Military Entrance Program something. I might have that wrong, but so when you go in there, they process you all over again. They go over your contract and then you sign all over again. And then you have 2 different sign-in ceremonies. And on each one, they tell you like, okay, if you want to back out, this is your moment. And you know what? I almost wanted to because I had a boyfriend back then. And then, they're like, oh, I'm going to leave my boyfriend. And then of course, watching my mom cry and my sisters, I was like, oh man, am I making a mistake? So I remember them telling us like, if you want to back out, this is your last chance. And I was like, is this a trick? Because at that point, they really mess with you. Like you really, like the way they talk to you, I just didn't know it was real. And of course, I was too afraid to raise my hand because I thought I'm going to be that fool that believed them. and then they make you wait for more hours because they're waiting on other paperwork stuff. And then they do it again. And then they repeat the same thing. And actually that second time somebody did back out and they disappeared. And we were all like, did they really let him go? Because we already swore out, we already swore.
They put him somewhere. I'm just kidding.
So nobody saw him after that. And then until they let us all go and go to our hotel rooms to wait for our flights the next day, we bump into that guy and they were like, oh yeah, let me go.
Wow.
So that's how we found out it was real. I was like, okay. I don't know if things have changed now, but that's definitely what happened then.
Well, it's good to know for people watching.
Ask.
So then you studied public policy? Public policy?
Oh, actually, so that was my concentration. I was really interested in politics, and I thought I was going to go work for like a lobbying firm that advocated for women in the military's rights, because so many women, they don't have access to a lot of healthcare things like abortions, even if they're raped by their own, comrades, which is something, it's a big issue. Also, protections against rape or sexual harassment. The military has had a huge long history of not really doing due diligence with
Yeah.
these investigations, and we hear that now, still in the news. So I just thought I was going to be in politics somehow and maybe even run for like a local office. But so my focus was social policy and leadership. So both were of interest for me because, of course, I got to get up in the ranks really fast. I remember I had a lot of friction from other service members, my own colleagues, because I was a young E6, which is a staff sergeant. And usually, I remember then my bosses who had been E6s for about 8 years. And there I was, 6 years in the military as an E6, and they had 15, 18 years and we're still in E6. So I think one of the reasons why I was able to go up in the ranks is because I was just told by a mentor to just volunteer for the stuff that people didn't want to show them that I was willing to play along and not be scared. And also, I remember him telling me like, hey, you have to have so many credits in college. You have to have so many credits with military education. You have to do really well. You have to score at least this score with your physical training test. So I remember him telling me all this stuff, and I actually listened, and I did not want to do the hard work, the grunt work anymore. As a mechanic. So it was like, whatever I have to do to just go and be a leader instead of, but the unique thing about that was that the way that I was kind of pressured to lead was so different than what I naturally wanted to be. And I stuck to my guns and people didn't like it. Some people called me weak because they wanted me to show aggression and just like horrible things that I felt that were unethical to do to soldiers. So I think that's why in my studies, I focus so much on the social policy to change certain rules however I could, and also to help women and other men too, like, rise up as leaders, but not in that aggressive way that we see leadership today. Because if you notice, people praise people in leadership skills who are very aggressive or who like never take a break or a vacation, and I'm like, that's crazy. We should not be praising that. We should be saying, hey, chill, be human. You don't have to put on this facade. So when I saw little kids like that kid that was bullying my child, I thought, well, there's an example right there of what they think strength is. And leadership, strength is not aggression. It's not being mean to others or disrespectful. Leadership is so different than that. And that's part of the reason why I chose that concentration within women and gender studies.
I love that. I think that, says a lot about who you are, that you're like trying to make these big changes and also like the impact you want to have on people. So I love that.
You say you were in the military like in around the early 2000s, correct?
Right.
So my in-laws actually, both of them were military as well, both of them Army. My mother-in-law, she's actually was like a grunt as well, started from the bottom, and she got promoted really quick. And she says it usually was because she was a woman and she didn't have a lot of competition out there that she was able to rank up so highly. And the other guys are kind of like, why is she even doing this? Like, she doesn't even like kind of undermining her stuff like that. And she always felt that pressure, kind of like I really shouldn't be here. I shouldn't be doing I shouldn't be ranked this high, because just all these negative things that, people in the military, you hear like, gossip and all that stuff. So was it the same situation around with you, like that kind of stuff, like the environment?
Absolutely. I can totally relate to that because I remember being criticized, not just for having rank, but for being young too. And sometimes for being Latina. And I do know that part of the reasons why I was always considered for promotion when I applied for it was because I was a woman and Latinx, because they needed that representation. Because you know what? There were a lot more women coming into the military, particularly Latinas. The military has always, for like maybe the last 20, 30 years, they have had a huge campaign to recruit Latinx people. And during my studies in my master's program, I actually wrote a paper on the way that the military targets our Latinx population. And what I found was that when they do target us, the ones who end up enlisting the most in the military in largest numbers tend to be our Latinx people. And within the Latinx people, the majority are women, although women, Latinx women, are the ones who are least likely to retire at the 20-year mark. The ones who are most likely to retire are the male Latinos, because of our cultural beliefs. So I'm sure that you've heard this and you might even relate to it, but there are a lot of parents who say, no, mija, no, mija, no te vayas, or don't do this or don't do that, because the family, la familia, and don't you want to have kids anyway? Or they'll say, oh, but you're married now. You don't need to do that. You need to just take care of your husband and your kids. So the idea of Marianismo, right? That is a big factor in why a lot of Latinas in the military do not retire. Or sometimes it's because they don't have that support. But that was very interesting to me, because I was like, I knew I had gotten promoted because I was young, for being Latina, and for being a woman. And the other thing that I saw was every time new females would come into our unit, because now I was the highest ranking female most of the times, or one of, they would have me do certain type of briefings to the young girls. There are kids who come, I call them kids, but they're young adults who come from so many walks of life. And one of the things that we as military members in leadership positions have to do is educate them even about basic things that they were not taught. For example, I remember many times being called to hold a little meeting with the new females to talk to them about how to take care of their personal hygiene when out in the field. And it's because a lot of girls are not talked to at home about periods or hygiene. I remember one girl asked me how to properly put on a tampon, or in another one, how to properly put on a pad. And they were very embarrassed. So I made sure to try to make them feel as comfortable as possible, because, well, I wasn't taught about the tampon. My mom did teach me about a pad, but it was like very, very briefly. It wasn't like she actually took one and put it on underwear and showed me, right? So, but she kind of explained, so I figured it out, and that was minimal. My mom, she wasn't too open about discussing the details of periods or like the human anatomy. So I remember having to explain, okay, girls, when we go out to the field, it's gonna be 7 days. There's no showers. This is how you can clean yourself, especially if you're on that time of the month. Or like showers. I remember being one or two of the total women in my section. And so what do? You can't sleep. Usually you're not allowed to sleep in the same tent or barracks with males. But of course, with field exercises, that was an exception. So they always felt like if they had to pull another female from another company to have this other female have a companion, because you're supposed to always have a battle buddy for safety reasons, they would do that. So it was a plus for the military to have more women, so that these type of situations would be taken care of. Because imagine a man having to explain, hey, soldier, I see that you dropped this thing here on the floor and you're not supposed to do that. Like we had a female who had never been taught how to dispose of sanitary napkins. And they were like, hey, Sergeant, can you go talk to her? Like, that's disgusting. And I was like, all right, cool. Okay, don't don't talk down to her. You don't know what she's been taught or not been taught.
Yeah.
So I had to go talk to her and say, like, hey, you know what? We don't dispose of things right next to your cot there in the tent when sleeping with guys, or even with yourself. Like this is the appropriate way to do this. So it was very eye-opening, because a lot of these girls, some of them came from like the poorest parts of the United States. Some of them came from Puerto Rico, who also came from like areas where It was very impoverished. And there were even people who came from other countries. I don't know how, but they were allowed to join the National Guard. I think it was some kind of like a citizenship path or something. But yeah, that's how I think I ended up becoming a staff sergeant. And I remember a lot of times people telling me, well, I don't think you're mature enough because you're only 25. I was like, well, I mean, if you're giving me this responsibility with this much rank, then don't come at me with that. That's crap.
Well, and you had more responsibilities as a woman to educate these other girls.
Yeah.
I mean, that's wild.
You make an interesting point too, because like I never actually thought about that kind of stuff. Like, because when you join the military, you do accept different people from different walks of life and different experience, and the basic of things that are basic to you are not basic to other people. So I can't even imagine that, man, being in the military with a bunch of dudes and then you're like only female and you have female problems.
Yeah.
So that's wow.
Yeah. And also like the guys too, you know, this is why I always tell like my husband, he's very open with talking about all this like female issues with our daughters. And that's something that I promote all the time for guys to not be like squeamish or anything when we say the word period, because there's nothing crazy about it. There's nothing like new about it. Women have always had this thing to deal with, and we don't like it ourselves. It's like, hey, if women didn't have to have that crap, believe me, we'd be so much happier. But yeah, there's so much in leadership and the way that we lead, men versus women. And we need to kind of not make it gendered. Like some women, they think that being a strong leader means adopting some male behaviors, but those male behaviors are sometimes not good. So we need to have like a neutral way of leading so that we become more human, regardless of how we identify as male or female or as she, he, or whatever. You know, that's the only way we're going to be able to work together with people, regardless of what background.
Agreed.
I did have a question as well. This is besides the military stuff, right? This is more of your bullying coaching thing. You say you do one-on-one consulting with parents and everything, and are they mostly like Latino audience, or is there like kind of a mix of everybody?
Honestly, now that I think about it, the majority of my audiences have been Latinx. Definitely. I do have a few here and there. It's almost like the schools or the organizations that have hired me know that there is a lack of education in that area. And that's why they asked me to come and host these events. And actually, I do them in Spanish, full Spanish. All the materials are in Spanish. I, the presenter, do them in Spanish. Sometimes the videos that I give them are in Spanish. So I do both languages. And it's really fun too, because I have this self-confidence issue with my Spanish. Because, you know, when you're speaking English all the time, since I was little, my mom always inculcated that idea of like speaking it properly the way you're supposed to, so that you come off professional and so that people don't think that you're uneducated or anything. So there are a few words here and there that I have to kind of like think, or I'll even ask my audience, I'm like, ¿cómo se dice? And they're like, oh, and they throw it out, because the majority of our Latinx population, even when they're mainly Spanish speaking, they understand English, or maybe they're just like more comfortable doing workshops or going to workshops in Spanish, so they help out. But for the most part, I can have a full conversation with people in Espanol.
Super great. Especially because like I feel that, you know, I tend more focus on Spanglish, but it's regard to the point. So it's an interesting thing that you told me that you focus in on Latinos, Latinx people. How do you deal with the machismo?
Oh my gosh, such a good question. So, you know, when teaching workshops, unfortunately, I do not have a lot of men in the classes. It's a goal of mine to try to get more fathers involved, because when I ask fathers, well, how do you teach your child to defend themselves from bullying or bullying prevention? Their answer is always something to do with physical aggression. But we're in a world where that's just not tolerated, especially in schools. Back in the day, maybe because it was like, oh, that's just a kid thing, you know, kids are just doing that again. But now we are understanding that bullying is different. Bullying is not what it used to be. Bullying now does not stop when you come home. It follows you through your devices. So when I have a father or an uncle or somebody that says, oh, well, that's just not, they're just being soft. I just try to break it down to them with examples and tell them, well, look, would you take this type of behavior from an adult? And usually they say no. Then why would you want your child to put up with that? Why?
Mm.
There are so many other different ways to teach a child how to resolve conflicts and to be tough, or like, just life lessons. But being bullied is not one of them. Maybe tease a little bit, because we do that with friends, but teasing is usually not ill intended. It's more just to have fun with, among friends. Bullying is different, and that's why I always stress that the definition itself is so misconstrued. Bullying is something that actually is ill-intended, and that does usually traumatize you, because it's bullying is something that is constant. It's over time. And imagine putting up with verbal abuse all the time. You're eventually going to have very low self-esteem, and then you're eventually going to even believe that you deserve it because it keeps happening over and over. You're also going to believe that you deserve it because nobody's standing up for you, which is a whole nother topic about being an upstander, standing up for yourself and for others. So that's how I explain it to people who just have that, like, no, necesitan ser duros, they need to just toughen up. And um, I do it with examples, because if I start arguing with them, they're not going to hear me.
So maybe a difficult question. Do you tell parents like maybe like the top like 3 signs that you're either that your child is a bully or your child is being bullied?
Ooh, thank you so much for this question. Yes, and yes, I tell them. I'm very honest with them. So I have had parents who tell me, hey, I think that my child is bully. You see, she's really, really smart. So she swears that she's always right, but she really talks down to people. So then I start at, I listen to what else they're saying. And and usually I tell them, okay, yeah, I think that your child is showing behaviors that signs of behavior of a bully. And this is what to look out for, Are kids kind of avoiding your child? Are kids always labeling your child as the trouble child or the bully? Are your kids hanging out with kids who always are in trouble? Those are all signs. And the way to deal with that is by simply speaking to your children, asking what's going on, and telling them, first and foremost, you love them no matter what. You just want to get them help. Because when a child bullies, they're hurting themselves just as much, and sometimes even worse than the victim. And I'm pretty sure you both have seen this before in the classroom, where you have a kid that's called the trouble kid. And even the teacher's like, oh, there's Johnny the trouble kid, or there's, Jimmy the whoever, And so then all the kids know Johnny as the trouble kid. So you're stigmatizing that child. So that child is going to eventually say, okay, everybody thinks I'm the trouble child. Let me show you I'm the trouble child. And so that's a way to cope. I mean, kids bully for so many different reasons. Some of them that they live in an environment where bullying is always happening. So to them, that's something normal. And then they go into the school or to church or the park. They're repeating the same behaviors without realizing that's not normal. And they don't know it until somebody tells them, hey, stop it. That's not cool. Or an adult sits them down and says, you know what? This is not normal. You're exhibiting, signs of bullying behavior. And then you start that conversation. The other question you asked is signs of kids who are being bullied. So those signs are, usually mood changes. Kids around you, right? The kids in your life, whether they're your children, your cousins, your nephews, your students. And if you notice that something, the mood has changed, it's time to start asking questions. If they are, say, being cyberbullied, you'll probably know that they're being cyberbullied because all of a sudden, they're avoiding their phones or their smart pads or whatever. Suddenly, they don't want to check email. Or when you ask them, hey, how's your friend so-and-so doing? They're like, oh, I don't want to talk about that person. Or suddenly, they have no friends. Something's going on. It's time to ask questions. Either something has happened to your child or your child is being a bully. Or, usually when moods change that bad is that something, whether it's bullying or some other type of abuse, is happening. And the other thing I want to mention is a lot of people ask, well, why this? I don't think bullying is such a big deal. I don't think it should be taught in depth like that. Well, think of it this way. If we don't teach children to defend themselves and to look for signs, then how do you expect children to defend themselves from, say, a predator or from somebody who's trying to get them to do something illegal or just something that's not right, So you have to start small and show them, give them that confidence. And there's so many little things that you can do to build up that confidence so that they know that they have the power of their voice. And when they use their voice, that they're going to be believed.
I love that. Oh, did you have? I feel like I always almost speak when you're about to speak. Go ahead.
No, you good. You good. I agree with her that, and like especially because in the Latinx community, like we have a culture thing around us where like a lot of it is bullying, but we grow up on it thinking it's not bullying until we get to become adults. Then we're like, oh, the heck, this is not right. So it's just fascinating because I think it culturally we do a lot of things that in America United States they think it's bullying. So it's hard to change the mindset of that as well. I think we can be very stubborn because we're like, oh, this is our culture kind of thing. Go back to doing like as an excuse,
Yeah, and almost like gaslighting the child, like, oh, it's not a big deal. They're just teasing but like when obviously it's affecting someone.
Yeah, your point about that, when you gaslight, which a lot of our people in nuestra comunidad don't even understand what the meaning of gaslighting is. But
yeah, can you explain what that is?
Yeah.
So that people know.
So gaslighting is when you're pretty much turning around the problem on them and telling people that they're crazy or that it's just in their head or that they're imagining things. So when children come and say, they tell you that Johnny's bullying them, they don't have the language usually, especially the younger kids, on how to explain what's going on because there's different types of bullying. Most bullying is undercover. It's not the very obvious punch in the face or the bruises on the body, right? If I'm say 7 years old and I come and tell you, hey, this person's being mean to me, and of course you're gonna be like, well, how are they being mean to you? We're like, well, they're saying that I'm not smart. Okay, that's just an opinion. You're not gonna think anything of it. But then if you dig more and then you find out that kids are being treated with microaggressions or with backhanded compliments, those are big words that kids usually don't know how to use. So if I have, and this is something that I saw a teacher do, the teacher said, oh, you're not the sharpest tool in the shell, are you? And I thought, wow, that was so mean. And the kid knew that there was something wrong there, but they didn't know how to explain it. So imagine how hard it is for children to explain that somebody's being mean to them. So if I go and tell the teacher, hey, this person's being mean to me, but I can't explain that it was a backhanded compliment that they're always saying to me, every time I raise my hand or whatever, then it's gonna just not go under report or not reported. And there is approximately 30% of children who do report. So that means there's 70% of children out there suffering because they don't know how to report it or how to explain it. So if I go to my mom and say, well, the teacher was being mean to me, she told me I wasn't smart. And, let's say my mom is like, ay, pero she's just messing with you. Or maybe you're taking it too seriously. Then, I'm now participating in the gaslighting. You're actually teaching that child to doubt their own emotions or their own intuition, which should be instead amplified. It should be built up because when you have that feeling, you need to follow it because usually, everybody knows when you have that feeling, you should follow it because something is there. And so we need to teach our children how to trust themselves so that they can take the right actions.
I think that's such a good point because I think thinking about myself, like I now as an adult within the last 10 years after like going to therapy and all these things, like now I have this like toolbox of this vocabulary that I can use to express my emotions. These kids obviously aren't going to have that. And like, I'm just thinking of like my nephews, like their emotions are like all over the place. So like, I'd imagine it'd be hard to like figure that out. So thank you for pointing that out.
Yeah, you're welcome. I just want to give an example in case it helps, because this is, I think it's a common one in Latino America. This person that I knew, he's a lot older now. He's like in his 40s, but he said, for the longest time, I really believed my mom every time that me decía, ay, es que eres burro. And I thought, that's one of the very common things, right? It's like parents get frustrated and they're like, ay, o qué mula que eres, or whatever. Because I remember like my mom used to say stuff like that. I was like, am I really? And so, yeah, those are the little microaggressions, or those are the little things that in our culture we hear a lot, or at least back in the day, older generations. I don't know how prominent it is now, but those are the type of examples, or the type of things that we need to be careful of what we say, because this person who's in his 40s, he said he had a conversation with his mom not too long ago, and it was about that. And she said, oh my gosh, oh, that's just something we say. And he was like, all these years, I really thought that she thought I was dumb because she would call me burro all the time. So that comes to show you just don't know unless you're actually communicating. Kids don't know, and they grow up believing whatever they're hearing.
So I actually have a question about you. You know how our language, we add affection to certain words that doesn't really mean affectionate, like, oh, mira mi gordito, mira mi que feito, stuff like that. That's kind of negative, but not negative at the same time. What do you think about that?
I think that you have to be careful and ask children or whoever you're saying it to, because I had a conversation not long ago too with somebody else, a family member, and she told me, she's like, when y'all used to call me chaparrita, I hated that because she was short and she was cute. And she said, and as an adult, every time that people would call me that, it felt like I was being made to be small, like I could never grow up. And so I would say just use it with caution, because there are some times when it is a term of endearment and it is embraced. But then there are times when the receiver does feel diminished, and it's all about the receiver. Even if you never intended it to be a bad thing, it's about how it's received. So you have to ask. And I know that a lot of people hate this. They're like, ay, pues no es mi problema. If you took it wrong, then that's on you. No, because you're repeating it. So have that conversation.
That was a wonderful question, Rolando.
Yeah, thank you so much.
And I loved your answer. I mean, growing up, I was called gordita, just like as a term of endearment, but I like held on to that and I like hated that. And so now I am an adult and I can like say, don't call me that, but I didn't have those words. I feel like that I could. Yeah. So thank you.
You're welcome.
Is there any more questions you want to ask, Ali?
I think we're good. So if people are interested in hiring you or like looking for your resources, where can they find you, Dali?
So they can find me on dalitalks.com. And I actually have a webinar, Bullying Prevention 101, coming up in April 3rd. So I don't know if this is going to air before or after, but it'll be available after April. It's going to be a really good webinar on the basics of some of the things that I touched on here. But I'm also very, very active on Instagram, and my handle is Dali Talks. And I'm very active in Clubhouse. I have some rooms there where people can come in, have a discussion with me, ask me questions about anything related to bullying, diversity, parenting. And yeah, reach out. I love connecting with people.
That is amazing. That's how we know. Well, yeah, that's how I know that.
Clubhouse.
So,
we'll drop all your information down in the description box.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you so much again for spending time with us and letting us know all about what you're doing. Last question before we let you go. Is there any advice that you'd give to someone watching this in either wanting to go and kind of like in your career or just in general?
Oh, that's such a good question. Okay, so if you want to go into women and gender studies, know that it is still fairly new field of study that people don't really know how to utilize your skills. So you have to make sure to explain and brand yourself the way that you want to be seen. Otherwise, people are just not going to understand what you can do for them. And you can do so much in so many industries. So in a way, some people see that as a bad thing because it's kind of broad, but in a way it's beautiful because you can tap into so many different fields. And as far as bullying goes, listen to your children and ask questions. Ask a lot of questions. Kids know what they feel inside. They know it. They to the core. They just might not have the right words to describe it. So you as a caregiver or the parent or the guardian or the foster parent, the teacher, it is your job to make sure that you facilitate that communication with that child, because your ultimate priority is to keep that child safe.
Thank you.
Thank
You're
you.
All
welcome.
right. Well, until next time, if you guys like this, please like, share, comment, all the things. Follow us on things_I've learned on Instagram, and also our podcast, Latino Secrets. And you can also find either myself or Rolando on Clubhouse. So I'm going to plug that. Yeah, until next time.
Thank
Hey,
you for
guys.
having me.
Yeah, no problem. Thank you for watching, guys. Bye.